himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, "Have everyone go out from me." So there was no man with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. He wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed in his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come closer to me." And they came closer. And he said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. Now do not be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in this land for 2 years, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant in the earth, and to keep you alive by a great deliverance." Now we can kind of go back in time. Do you remember how many wives Jacob had? 2. Right? He worked for 7 years with Laban, was given a wife. He thought it was Rachel. Turned out not Rachel, it was Leah. So Laban, good father-in-law that he was, right? Makes him another deal. I tell you what, you work 7 more years, I'll give you the girl you thought you had the first time. And so he does, and has now 2 wives. And that worked out really good, right? Yeah, no, it didn't, because now he's got a favorite wife. But guess what? Favorite wife doesn't have kids. Unfavored wife, though, does. She has the first 4 of the 12 brothers. So then favored wife says, "I got an idea. I can't have kids. My handmaid can have kids." She gives her handmaid to Jacob, so now he has 1 concubine. She has 2 kids, but first wife, unfavored wife, says, "Well, I can do that too." Gives her handmaid to Jacob, so now he has 2nd concubine. She has 2 more kids. Then unfavored wife has 2 more kids. And there's a daughter in there somewhere. The oldest, or the unfavored wife had her, Dinah. But where she is in the order, I don't know. Then finally, Rachel has Joseph. And Joseph then becomes the apple of Jacob's eye. He is the favorite child above all the rest. And he's at the bottom of the pecking order for a number of years. And then along comes Benjamin. And so Benjamin then is the baby, but Benjamin's not the favored child, but rather Joseph. And it's so much so that the other brothers resent him. They come to the point they even hate him. And then Joseph starts having these dreams. And he even interprets them for his brothers, which just drives them up the tree even more. Because the interpretation they get is that they're all going to be bowing down to him. Not going over well. So one day, when Joseph's probably in his teens, his dad sends him out to check on his brothers. Check on those older brothers of yours out there and report back. And they see him coming. Probably because of that multicolored tunic that his daddy had given him. That just cranked up their ire even more. Before he gets there, they plot to murder him. They're ready to kill him. Reuben kind of talks them out of that. He says, there's a pit over here. Let's put him in a pit. So they tackle him, they beat him up, they throw him in a pit. They're going to leave him to starve. But Reuben, the oldest, he had a little bit of sense about him that this is probably not a good idea. I'm going to sneak back in the middle of the night and get him out of the pit. But before that can take place, along come this marauding band, and Judah, this is Jesus' ancestor here now, Judah has this brilliant idea. Hey, let's don't kill him. Let's get some money out of this deal. Let's just sell him. And so the other brothers say, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. We'll sell him. So they sell him to these nomads who take him off down to Egypt. Then they doctor up the coat with blood and go back and kind of half tell a lie and half tell a truth and, convince Jacob that his son is dead. So all these years now, Jacob is dead. Joseph is dead in Jacob's eyes. Well, down in Egypt, he is sold to a rich man, and everything in the house where Joseph is going really, really well. He's prospering, and so this man just keeps giving more responsibility to Joseph. And he keeps seeing everything flourish in his house. Everything is grand. But his wife decides that she wants him. And she makes a move on Joseph, and Joseph runs out to the point of even leaving his clothes behind to get away from her. And so since she was rejected, she goes, I'll show you, kid. So she claims rape. And even though her husband didn't believe it, I know that because Joseph wasn't executed. He would have been if the husband had believed it. He was thrown in prison. So in prison then, everything that's put under him continues to flourish. And so the chief of the guards keeps giving him more responsibility, and everything keeps going well. And if you remember, there was a cupbearer and a baker that had dreams. And God grants Joseph the ability to interpret these dreams. One of them was going to die after about 3 days, going to be executed. The other was going to be restored to his place. And Joseph tells him, when you're restored to your place with Pharaoh, remember me. Well, that went over well, didn't it? He goes back to his place in Pharaoh and promptly forgets all about Joseph. Until 2 years later, when Pharaoh has a dream and nobody can interpret it. And then the light bulb goes on, and the guy says, hey, now there was somebody in prison with me. He interpreted my dream. And so then he goes and interprets Pharaoh's dream. And Pharaoh promotes him to second in charge, to lay in store everything that he can to stock up for this 7 years when there will be absolutely nothing. And so when the famine sets in, Egypt is sitting well because they've stocked up for the 7 years of plenty that they've had for the 7 years of nothing that they're fixing to have. So much so that the rest of the region is starving, and they send people down to Egypt to get food, amongst which are Joseph's brothers. They don't recognize him, but he recognizes them. And so then he just pulls all kind of shenanigans with them, gets them in trouble, accuses them of being spies, and oh well, if you're gonna do this to me, I tell you what, you need to go back. You said you had a younger brother. You go back and get him and bring him back. And they know good and well that's not going to work. They know that their father is never going to turn loose the baby. So, who's the second? Reuben's first. Reuben. Oh, come on, help me out. Who's number two? What? Simeon. Simeon gets left behind. And they go home. And they have absolutely no plan to go back. It's like they just, forget him. It's not until they start running low of food that they say, oh, well, maybe we need to go back. And their dads encourage them, you need to go back. And they say, well, Dad, well, you know, it's kind of like this. He said we could come back, but we had to bring baby brother with us if we did. Well, Jacob's not too keen on that idea, but he finally does let Benjamin go. Well, they get the food, but Joseph's still at it, right? He takes his own chalice and has his servant put it into a bag that Benjamin has. Lets them get about a day out and then sends the troops to get them. Oh, stealing my stuff, drag them back. And they all know that they are going to die. Then Joseph gets to the point that he's ready to reveal to them who he really is. And even at that point, I think the one thing that just kind of finally pushed it for Joseph that says they've really recovered is when they were willing to do anything and everything they could to get Benjamin out of there to save their dad. They were convinced that it would kill their dad if Benjamin didn't get out. And they were all willing to take the rap for Benjamin. And Joseph, I think, realized, okay, maybe they really have repented. Maybe they are sorry for what they've done. And so now he reveals himself, and it says they're really quiet. Can you imagine what that would have been like? You have beat this kid up. You've hated him. You wanted to kill him. You've beat him up. You've thrown him in a pit. Then you've sold him into slavery. You have no idea what he went through in all of Egypt. And now he is second in charge of Egypt. And you are down there at his mercy. And he just said, oh, by the way, I'm your brother. I'm the guy you mistreated. I'm the guy you hated. I'm the guy you resented. I'm the guy you mistrusted and did all kinds of evil things too. That's me. Now, y'all want to die slowly, or you want to die quick? Oldest to youngest, youngest to oldest, start in the middle and work out both ways. I don't care. Can you imagine what was going through their heads? Well, what does he say? Don't worry about it. God's eyes, it's all worked out. Okay, how many of you are a Joseph? Yeah, me too. You know, I used to beat my brothers up all the time. My brothers would jump on me too, but they had never, ever, 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 ever thought about doing some of the things that these guys did. We never cooked up this idea of throwing him in a pit. We never cooked up this idea of let's sell him. I never thought of that. That was an idea, yeah. Excuse me. I wouldn't be like, I'm sorry, I'm not like Joseph. That takes a lot of forgiveness. That takes a lot of forgiveness. Where can you get hurt the most? What kind of relationships can you get hurt the most? The ones you're closest to, right, the ones you love. Those are the ones that can hurt you the most. Because those are the ones you say, there is no way that they would hurt me. They know me inside, outside, upside down. There's no way. And so when they do something, it's doubly bad already. And then it seems like it's even worse, you know, because they do know how to hurt you. They can really cut you deep. And so the closer that relationship is to start with, the more damage that's done when it's done. Now, you reckon we've got any family problems now like they had back then? Probably not to the degree of that, right? But we do have problems in families. We have brothers and sisters that would lie about each other, that would backstab each other, that would, they'd do any kind of thing. It's amazing what we would do to each other. And we're related. But I think God expects us to be like Joseph. And I'll tell you right now, I'm not there yet. And I hope I don't get in a position where I have to be that way. I don't think any of my family is to that degree. But I think God expects it. Huge forgiveness. Absolutely massive forgiveness. But they had issues in that family. Living together, you'll have problems. Survival of the family depends on how we handle the problems. Doing things God's way strengthens the family. Doing things our way tears apart the family. Sometimes I need to remember that my sin is just as great or greater than my brothers or my sisters, and God forgave me. So I can and I must forgive him or her. In Matthew chapter 6, right in the middle of the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus teaches how to pray, and right at the end of that he says, "For if you forgive men when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive men your sin or their sins, your heavenly Father will not forgive you your sins." Yeah, I read a murder mystery one time. It was written as a British kind of book, but I like murder mysteries, and this particular one, there was a guy who had a habit of going out and getting drunk, and when he came home, he was abusive. He would just beat his wife around and abuse her all kinds of ways. And then one day, they found him dead on the doorstep, right at the doorstep of the house. And they're running the investigation, the detectives trying to find out what happened, where did things go wrong, who could possibly have done something like this. A lot of the people in the town wondering why she even stuck around with him. But she was a nice lady. She was well respected in town, mild, meek, loved by everybody, church-going lady and all that kind of stuff. He was over at her house one day, and she kind of got sidetracked with something, and he was just kind of looking around the kitchen, and he turned the calendar over, and there's some hash marks, 4 marks and then one for the 5th one, and he kind of counted up real quick, and he wrote it down, and then he got to checking his notes later, and he says 490. I said, I know who murdered him. Took the detective a while. You know who murdered him? Matthew 18:21, Peter came to Jesus and said, "Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother when he sins against me? Up to 7 times? And Jesus answered, I tell you, not 7 times, but 70 times 7. Which is what? 490. Yeah, see? As soon as he said 490, I said, I know who killed him. She did. Buddy, she'd marked them on the calendar. 490 times. That was it. I think Jesus' point is you don't count. You don't count. But that was a lot of abuse to have to put up with. And it seems like it's especially true inside families. All right, let's flip over to Exodus chapter 2. Exodus chapter 2, we'll just read the first 4 verses there. It says, Now a man of the house of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. And when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could no longer hide him, she got a papyrus basket for him, coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the banks of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. And this is the birth of who? Moses, yeah. And what had transpired in Egypt prior to his birth? This is a long time after Joseph, right? As a matter of fact, I think the opening verses of Exodus chapter 1 says that there was a Pharaoh that came into power who did not know Joseph. So this is a time that's way after Joseph's come and gone. And in the meantime, the Israelites have flourished. And they've filled up that territory, and now they've become a threat. So much so that Pharaoh has told the midwives, says, when you go to deliver these babies, if it's a male baby, you kill it. And you remember what the midwives said? Well, these Hebrew women, they're strong. They don't even wait for us to get there. They deliver that baby, and they're on with about their business. We don't even have a chance. So God bless those midwives. They had babies. Pharaoh then turns to his people and he said, when the Hebrews have babies, you kill the males. Throw them in the Nile. Girls can live. So, when this Levite, Amram, Jochebed, when they have a son, they hide him for 3 months. How they manage to keep him quiet that long, I don't know. Manage to keep him quiet for 3 months, and they figure, well, there's nothing that we can do now. I mean, we got to do something. This family pulls together, and they orchestrate a plan to save this baby. So they create a basket, seal it with pitch so no water can get in, float it at the Nile at just the right time. This was all pre-planned. This was all plotted out. They had this figured out to the nth degree. They knew good and well Pharaoh's daughter was coming down to that river at just such a time. And that basket was going to be there, and sister was there to watch it and make sure that it got to where it was supposed to get to so it would be noticed. Hoping that she would see the baby and just be touched by the baby, and that would be it, and that is exactly what happened. And then sister jumps in there and says, oh, do you need someone to nurse this baby? I'll get you a nursemaid. Yeah, you don't think this thing was planned? Yeah, she was primed and ready. And so then Moses gets raised by his mother. What a plan. You see, families, when they're threatened from the outside, tend to come together. And I told you I beat my brothers up sometimes. Well, let somebody else jump on one of my brothers. Yeah, that wasn't happening. Families pull together. Families defend from the outside. They're going to make sure nothing happens to each other. Just like this family did. They pulled in together to make sure that they hid this child and that he was going to live. And as it turns out, of course, he ends up leading his people out of the land of Egypt. But in our families, we have things that threaten us from the outside. Death, old age or young, disease, disability, individual failures, whether at work or school, divorce, unwanted pregnancy, unemployment, alcohol or other drugs, arrest, convictions, jail time. I mean, there's just all kinds of things that bombard the family. But then, how does the family react? Hopefully, the family pulls together. Hopefully, the family organizes to deal with this together. Whether that is our individual family or it is this family. We pull together and we deal with it. Whether it's sickness, whether it's work or, unemployment, alcohol, drugs, whatever it is. We as a family pull together and we deal with it. Ecclesiastes 4, 9 through 12. Two are better than one because they have a good return for their work. If one falls down, his friend can help him up, but pity the man who falls and has no one to help him up. Also, if two lie down together, they will keep warm, but how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. Whatever the source of the crisis, Christian families do well when they lift each other up, offer support, and come alongside. Colossians 3, 12 through 14. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive whatever grievances you may have against one another. Forgive as God forgave you. And over all these virtues put on love that binds them all together in perfect unity. Paul, writing to Timothy in chapter 4, verses 7 and 8 says, I have fought the good fight, I have finished the course, I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award me on that day, and not me only, but also all those who long for his appearing. You see, we've got a promise out there. If we stick together, if we hold the course, if we do it God's way, there's a crown waiting for us. There's a reward waiting for us. And we can be right there with Paul. Romans chapter 8, Paul says, what then shall we say in response to this? If God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but gave up all for us, how will he not also, along with him, that is Christ, graciously give us all things? Who will bring a charge against those whom God has chosen? After all, it is God who justifies. Who is he that condemns? After all, Jesus Christ died, and more than that, was raised to life, and is at the right hand of God interceding for us. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall trouble? Any of those things that we just mentioned earlier? You know, any of those things that kind of befall a family? Can they keep us from Christ? Trouble, hardship, persecution, famine, nakedness, danger, sword. As is written, for your sake we face death all day long, yet we are considered as sheep to the slaughter. No, in all of these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither things present nor future, nor any powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all of creation can separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. There's absolutely no way that anything can take us away if we pull together as a family. Whether that's our individual family or it is this church family. Nothing in all of creation can pull us away from the love of Christ. Now, the final one we want to look at is Ephesians 5, 25 through 33. Husbands, love your wife just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing of the water with the word, to present her to himself as a radiant church, without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. In the same way, husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated his own body, but feeds it and cares for it, just as Christ does the church. For we are members of his body. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh, quoting Genesis 2:24. This is a profound mystery, but I'm talking about Christ and the church. However, each one of you must also love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. To what degree must a man love his wife? I'm sorry? He's willing to give his life for her. Just as Christ loved the church. And just as what? He loves himself. That's some pretty high standards, right? You are to love your wife, guys, as Christ loved the church. You are to love your wife, guys, as you love your own self. And just as Christ died for the church, you should be willing to die for your wife. What's the logical conclusion when a man does not love his own body? What's the logical conclusion if you don't love your own self? Well, yeah, you cannot love others. What? Yeah, there's a problem here, isn't there? There's a serious problem here. If you do not love your own self, I think there's a mental defect. Because he says, obviously, you love your own body. So if you don't love your own body, then you got a serious problem. So, if there's a guy around that wants to beat his wife up, what does that tell me? Tells me he needs to be beat up. Isn't that what it says? You treat your wife as you would yourself, right? Treat your wife as you would yourself. So you want to beat up your wife? Okay, guys, let's go. We'll show him. You like getting beat up? Okay. We'll beat you up. Guy's got a problem. Paul says, of course you love your own body. You wouldn't do anything like that. He goes back and quotes again Genesis 2:24. A man shall leave his father and mother, cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. How are we one flesh? In what ways are we one flesh? Physically, I'll give you that one. Sexual. Okay, now what else? I took the easy one. Yes, you are mentally one. You know what he's going to say before he ever says it. You know what she's thinking before it ever comes out of her mouth, right? Yeah, you're mentally, you're kind of there most of the time. Peggy can tell you what I'm going to say half the time. She's wondering what I'm going to say up here, but, otherwise she can. But you are together physically, you're there mentally, you're there socially, you're there psychologically, you're there financially, you're there emotionally. If there's any other way, you're there. You are one. You become one. So, to me, that's the most important person in the world. And my girls knew that. They could argue with their mother, but they had to be careful. Because when they crossed the line, they were no longer arguing with their mother. Then they were arguing with my wife, and they didn't have the right to do that. And they knew it. Because I was suddenly between the two of them. And they didn't like how red my face got. They didn't like the tone of my voice because they had crossed the line. There's a difference in their mother and my wife. And they had to make sure they were talking to their mother. And that's the way it needs to be, guys. She's your wife. There's a line people can cross, and they've gone too far. They're not talking to their friend anymore. They're not talking to their associate anymore. They're talking to your wife. And maybe they better talk to you. That was the option my girls had. Hey, you can talk to your dad for a little bit. And we'll change the whole tone of the conversation. You know, we have circles of acquaintances out here, and lots of times there are lots and lots of people in that big circle. And then we have a smaller circle where the group is a lot tighter. Jesus had multitudes around him. But then there were times that he only had the 12. But there were also times that he had 3, right? James and John. Peter, James, and John. That was like the inner circle. And we have that too. We have maybe 2 or 3 people that we're just really, really close with. But when you get down to it, there's going to be one person that you are closer to than anybody else in the entire world. And you know who that better be, right? It better be your spouse. It better be your spouse. Now, I do know that women tend to have 2 or 3 really close friends. Guys don't do that. We have one. And she's it. That's the way it's got to be. That intimate relationship, that up-close relationship. Why is marriage essentially a union between a man and a woman? Because God said so. And that's the bottom line. You know, I hated it when my dad said, because I said so. But, you know, sometimes when it gets down to it, I had to do that too. Because I said so. You exhaust all the other reasons. Okay, because I said so. That's just it. That's the way it goes. But Jesus quoted, or God said it in Genesis 2:24. Jesus quoted it in Matthew 19:4-6. Jesus also added, "Let not man separate what God joined together." Paul quotes it in Ephesians 5:31. And Paul also adds here that it is bigger than a man and a woman. It mirrors Christ and the church. Christ does not have multiple wives. He has one. And that's the example. All this man and woman stuff, Paul says, foreshadows Christ and the church. The relationship that he has should be the relationship that we have. And then it's done the right way for the right reason, and it works God's way. All righty. Thank you very much for your attention. We'll pick up again next week.